So we ended our last part with this question: how do you make Christianity Chinese? Right? How, from the perspective of the missionaries and the perspective, of course, of Chinese converts to Christianity. And one thing we have to remember, there were some Chinese Christians, especially Catholics, who had been here for a couple hundred years already. Their family were old Christians. How do you make it so that Christianity fits into the Chinese context? How do you disconnect it from imperialism? How do you improve its image? How do you show Chinese people that maybe this is something you should consider? Right, that's kind of the problem, and it's difficult to do this when you're associated with imperialism, when you're associated with rebellion and things like that. How are you going to deal with this? And in this next section, we're going to look at how missionaries and Chinese Christians did try and deal with these issues, and how they had some problems and how they had some creative ways of trying to dealing with it. Now, one thing, of course, and I just wanted to kind of illustrate this, is just to try and put Chinese clothes on Christianity. So this is a image created by a Catholic Chinese artist, it says an angel announces the birth of Jesus to shepherds, right? And it's Chinese style. Everyone's Chinese. This is one way you can try and do this. Here's another example: the birth of Jesus, same artist. There you can see Chen Yuandu, also known as Lucas or Luke. And he's doing the same kind of thing there. Chinese style, but Western theme. So that's one thing you can do. And I don't want to take away from that effort. There is something to that, and it's a creative way of trying to deal with it. And this is a Chinese Christian who's doing this, right? This adds a kind of layer of authenticity to it. It's not a Western person saying, okay, how can I make Chinese people, how do I fit this into Chinese Christianity? It's a Chinese Christian saying, okay, I'm Chinese, I'm Christian. How do I bring these things together? But it's you notice it's using traditional imagery, right? This is kind of a traditional way of Chinese people doing things. But in the early 20th century, which is the period we're now shifting into, that's not everything that Chinese people are concerned about. They're not thinking so much about tradition. On one side, they're thinking about survival. And this is a Chinese poster from the 1920s. And it shows this man represents China. And he's being strangled by imperialism and warlordism. And imperialism, I think you can guess. Warlordism, what happened was, by this time, the Chinese government has fallen apart. There is no real functioning Chinese government in much of the 1920s. That will improve in the late 1920s, 1930s. But the key thing here, we can understand this as division, right? So we Chinese people, we're suffering. Our country is falling apart. We don't have a strong government. Because we don't have a strong government, we're divided. We are facing civil war. We're facing imperialism. This is bad for us. How are we going to deal with this problem? Well, maybe we need to turn to a new ideology like communism, right? There's going to be a successful communist revolution in 1917. Maybe we need to imitate the communists. So if you're coming from a Christian perspective, trying to figure out how do we help make our religion make sense to Chinese people in a way that keeps it Christian, this is good in a sense, right? This is, like I said, this is authentic. This is Chinese Catholic making Chinese Catholic art. I don't know if that's going to resolve these new issues, though, right? How are you going to deal with that? And I want to give you some examples using some Chinese posters. It shows how Christians, and remember the focus here is on Protestant Christians. I just used the Catholic art there. This focus on all these posters I'm going to show you next are Protestant. There's this idea, Christianity is a way that we can help reform China, right? How do we deal with this problem here, with this division, with this civil war, with this imperialism? Not through communism, but through Jesus. Right? And that's what this says here. It says, preach Christ, reform China. And you've got Christianity here, right? That's what this says. But then they're also carrying, and these guys all represent like evil things, bad things in society. That says sin. And a lot of these are Christian ideas, but this says freedom. And this says, where to go? Enlightenment. So there's this idea, and you'll notice this is very similar to what was going on in Korea. This idea that Christianity can help save our country, right? And that's why it says, preach Christ, reform China. And this banner here says, the new China. So there's this idea that among some Christians in China, this is how we can do this. This is what we can do. To deal with these problems, we need a Christianity that brings not only personal individual salvation, but things like freedom and enlightenment. How are we going to do that? Well, let's, again, similar to what they were doing in Korea, let's build institutions. Let's build hospitals. Let's build schools, right? And this is the image of the Hongqiao Christian College here that's very old. I think it's built in like 1850s, so very old university. And there you can see it's got this kind of Christian logo, truth, love. This is, I think, is sincerity and benevolence in Chinese. And then this is just the name of the university. But there's the idea, let's build universities to help educate Chinese. So that's how we can reform China, right? Through modern education. We'll bring in Western experts. We'll bring in Western money, and we will build these things. And one thing that's interesting, to give you an idea how this might work, the Boxer Rebellion, the Boxers lost, and the Chinese government was forced to pay a lot of money. And the Americans said, we're not going to keep the money. We're going to use it to get scholarships to support education. Though I think that was mostly to American universities. But the idea here is that there's this belief that China can be saved through modern education, and the missionaries are there to raise money and to provide the teachers needed to staff these colleges. And then here are some banners that kind of posters, I think, illustrate what Christians were trying to do. There you can see the YMCA. It says, the poster for the 8th National Convention of the Chinese YMCA shows an image of a train filled with people leaving a railway station. There's a group of people remaining at the station, are most are dressed in traditional clothing, although one man is dressed in Western-style clothing as pointed to the moving train. The poster encourages people to move forward, not to be left behind. And so the idea here is it's encouraging people, and here it says, the future is bright. Don't be left behind. Get on the train. Go to the YMCA conference and learn how to save your country. And so there's this kind of very strong idea of progress here, that through Christianity, we can have progress. And this is important. One thing I just want to stress, maybe when you think of the YMCA, you think of a place to go play basketball or go exercise. But here, during this time period, the YMCA was seen as a way of bringing civilization and knowledge and education and modernity and all those things. So that's one thing to emphasize. Here, I think this is really striking. Friends of Jesus. And it says, the top word says Friends of Jesus, and the small words, blue words, say Jesus was originally a carpenter. And it says, come to me and you will find peace. And then there's all these different workers, right? And the idea here is that Christianity is for you as a worker. Not communism, right, which also claims to be for workers, but Christianity. After all, our founder was himself a worker. And there's this idea here, we're going to support workers' rights. We're going to do things to help the workers. So Christians are going to say, we're going to not only help bring individual salvation, we're going to transform society, similar to what we saw in Korea. This could be in a lot of different ways too. Quickly come for the smallpox vaccine. This image has nothing directly to do with Christianity, but this was a Christian poster. And basically the idea here is you got a little kid here who's been vaccinated. They have the little bumps from the vaccination. You see, happy kid. But this poor young lady, she was not vaccinated, and so her face is marked by smallpox. Here, the harm of hiring prostitutes. And this was put out by Christians. It talks about all the problems, mostly coming from venereal disease that you can get. I won't read this, but if you want to read it, you can certainly pause the video. But there's this idea, and this is where you can see this idea, preach Christ, meaning, in a sense, have a moral transformation. This will reform China. If we're not going to prostitutes, we're going to have more money and we're going to be healthier. And what I think was especially interesting is like this kind of issue of how women could figure in these posters. So this is women's prayer pictures. And what it says is, it says, every day work much, pray much. And it's just talking about women are busy and they have a lot of work to do. But here's ways that you can pray in order to keep living a Christian life even while you're working. Prayers when laundering. Lord, please wash my heart and I will be white as snow. I like prayer when opening the door. Lord, please open my heart and receive you in my heart. Things like that. Prayer when watering plants. Lord, please send me your spiritual rain to my heart and make the good seeds in my heart grow. This is kind of cute. But it's interesting because it assumes this idea of women as domestic. But there was also this problem of how women workers were treated. And again, these are Christian posters that are meant to kind of challenge that and say women need to be treated better at their work. So there's this idea that Christianity can help improve society. So for example, this says how a woman worker spends her 24 hours. She works 12 hours. She sleeps 7 hours. going back and forth to work about 2 hours, eating, education, household chores 3 hours. The idea is this poor woman is overworked. 12 hours a day is just not enough. And this looks especially at the issue that workers might face, young workers. They said, why should I work at night when other children sleep? Right? None of this is directly Christian, but there's this idea that Christianity, through Christian morality, through caring about the individual as a child of God, that can help improve society and would give Christianity a better image and encourage more people to believe in it. I just want to point out, this is, I think, a really well done poster, right? Like, I think this is just really cool. They really were creative with this. And you can also see this was connected to ideas of saving the nation. We already saw that, right? The new China. And here, I think this is really cool. Literacy chart, 2 pie charts showing the literacy rate in Japan and China. This is Japan. White means they can read. Black means they can't. So most Japanese people can read. Most Chinese people can't, right? There's this idea, Japan is ahead of us. We need to catch up. Now, of course, the problem is Japan's not a Christian country, so I don't know how much that helps there. But I think the idea is that we as the Christian church can be, through being involved in education, can help deal with this problem. So we're a method that we can use to catch up. And there was this hope among many Western Christians, especially in the United States, to make China into a Christian republic, right? There's a strong hope to build a Christian republic. What's interesting is at the same time, in the 1920s, there was a very strong anti-Christian movement. I mean, and it was literally called the anti-Christian movement. It began in 1922 in particular. So why would this develop when we just saw all these things that seem good, right? Helping bring in modern medicine, helping bring in social concern for people, and so on and so forth. Well, in a sense, it didn't go far enough for some Chinese. There was the general rise of radicalism. Right, the Soviet Union you had the Russian Revolution in 1917. Shortly after that, the Soviet Union, the first communist government, is established. And there are still frustrations with Western imperialism that is still ongoing. And Christianity is seen as a part of that Western imperialism. And in addition, whereas in the past, liberal democracy, such as what you had in the United States and Great Britain and France, that was seen as the future. Now, the future doesn't, now those things seem conservative and old-fashioned. Things like communism and socialism, that seems progressive. That seems like it's going to be the future. So for many Chinese, these ideas just didn't resonate, especially many radical thinkers. In addition, much of modern education was under Christian control, and the classes were not going to be as radical as some of these people would have liked, right? They were teaching that, China needs to be more like the United States. And some of these young people say, no, China needs to be more like the Soviet Union. This led to attacks on Christians and the push to seize property, especially, universities that were held, owned by Christian missionary orders and things like that. Now, what limits this is that important Chinese leaders were Christians. And there's 2 really big ones I want to mention. One is Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who had converted to Christianity in the late 19th century, and he would become the first president of the Republic of China and would be a very, very important leader in China, widely respected, and that put a limit to this. And he's interesting because he did want to make China into a republic like the United States, though he also wanted socialism to a certain extent. He said, China's very poor. We can't have like laissez-faire capitalism. We need something like socialism. So important Chinese leaders were Christians, and that helped prevent some of this. Another guy who's, what will happen to Sun Yat-sen will just, unfortunately, he gets stomach cancer and dies. And his successor is a man named Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek is a really fascinating figure. He would go on to be basically a military dictator, and would later, he's going to lose to the communists in the Chinese Civil War, flee to Taiwan, establish the Republic of China there, and would be a dictator for basically the rest of his life. What's interesting is in 1929, he converts to Christianity, and that also helps put a stop to this. And he becomes the lead, basically the dictator may not be the best word, but it's the closest I can think of at the moment. And he's in charge of China, and he converts to Christianity. And one reason he does so is he marries this woman, Sung Mei-ling. Sung is the family name, Mei-ling is the individual name. And part of marrying her, and she was the sister of Sun Yat-sen's wife, this guy's wife. So there's this kind of family dynamic going on. she was from a very rich and powerful Chinese Christian family, and so they wouldn't let her marry him unless he promised to at least consider Christianity. And he would, so there's this kind of family connection there in his conversion. And then he hired her brother, basically, TV Soong, because this was a very wealthy Christian banking family. He had a lot of money and was a really good businessman, and he brought him in as his finance minister, and he actually did a good job of running the country's finances. So you can kind of see here that you've got, and this is one thing I want to stress, when I kept talking about, like, we looked at all these problems with Christianity in 19th, 20th century China, it's important to remember, there are Chinese people who are becoming Christians, and who are very devout Christians and take their religion very seriously. But you can also see this nexus between Christian education and liberal democracy and capitalism and things like that, because, I mean, like, this guy's literally a banker. And so you've got this kind of nexus here. So Christianity, it's more than simply a doctrine, right? There's other things that go along with it. And you might just say, well, Chiang Kai-shek, he just becomes a Christian because it allows him to marry into this powerful family and get an advantage of their money and talent. And I think there's some truth to that. But here's what's interesting. He wrote this in his diary, right? So this was something for him, his own personal perspective. It wasn't something that was meant to be shared with the public. And he wrote, "Believers in Jesus must control themselves, endure insults, and be patient in suffering. Every day they must bear the cross along with Jesus." Now, this is a Catholic image, but I just want to highlight it because it just shows the suffering of Jesus. And that's how Chiang Kai-shek is making sense of his own difficulties he has in governing China. So I do think he took his religion seriously. It would have been nice if it would have led him to be a little bit less dictatorial. I mean, the guy was pretty brutal when he thought it was necessary. But he does seem to have also at the same time taken the religion seriously. Now, Chiang Kai-shek had two big problems. One was that he was having to fight the communists. There was a growing communist movement in China that he had to fight. And he also had to fight the Japanese. And Japan is going to invade China in 1937. I don't want to go too much into this, but I do want to talk a little bit briefly about what missionaries are going to do. So Japan invades China in 1937. They seized the Chinese capital, which was not at Beijing. Usually when you think of the capital of China, you think of Beijing, but this time period it's in Nanking, which was the same city, by the way. Sometimes it's called Nanking, sometimes it's called Nanjing. It's complex. But it's the same city that the Taiping seized. But it's the capital under Chiang Kai-shek. The Japanese will take it, and for about 6 weeks, they will allow the officers will allow the soldiers to go on a rampage in the city, killing Chinese civilians and committing mass rape is really terrible. And it's called the Rape of Nanking because it's not metaphorical, it's not symbolic. Like, it literally was a huge amount of sexual assaults against Chinese people. And I do want to highlight, though, here that there was an effort by Westerners living in Nanjing to help protect Chinese people. And one of them was I haven't talked about a lot of women missionaries, and I need to do so, I think, especially this one, Minnie Vautrin, who helped establish this area here. This was basically this kind of walled compound where foreigners lived in Shanghai, and where they had a lot, you'll see, of colleges. Right? Remember I said that they had this kind of institution building, and you can see here, we've got the University of Nanking here. We've got Gingling College. There's a lot of this kind of stuff here. And what happened is she and other missionaries and Western diplomats would use their influence and their power and as much as they could to protect Chinese people who managed to flee to this area. So many Chinese people fled to this area, and through the work of many Western people, including missionaries like Minnie Vautrin, they were protected from these Japanese assaults. And she had this statement, "Had I 10 perfect lives, I would give them all to China." So this represents that you do have these missionaries who are very sincere, who want to help the Chinese people. And what's sad about Minnie Vautrin, I think, is she does survive this. She, when there's a lull, she eventually returns to the United States and commits suicide in 1941. I think in a large part because of the horrible things that she had witnessed there. And I won't go into it, but it was very, very bad. What's also important to note, and this is a story we often don't talk about, I think, is that these Western missionaries in China, they are in touch with Western missionary groups in the United States and church groups, and they do their best to keep the plight of the Chinese people as they're suffering from Japan's invasion in public knowledge, right? And they're always calling for the support of China by the United States. And it's interesting because there is this strong connection between these missionaries and the people who run Life magazine, which is a very, very important magazine at the time, and this thing called the China Lobby. And I don't mean like lobby in like a hotel. It's a lobby as in like you lobby the government. This group of Chinese Christians, Chinese government officials, Western Christian missionaries, and so forth work together to try and get the United States government to support China. There you can see Sun Mei-ling, right, the wife of Chiang Kai-shek. And I don't have time to talk about here, but if you look at why the Americans get involved in World War II, the fundamental reason Japan attacks Pearl Harbor is because they don't like our policy towards China of supporting them against China, of supporting China in their fight against Japan. That's essentially why they attack us at Pearl Harbor. It's a little bit more to it, but that's the quick answer. So you've got this idea. It's interesting because you've got this attempt now by these missionaries to try and work with and help China in order to protect its sovereignty and protect its independence, which is very different from where we began, where, in a sense, Christian missionaries were benefiting from China's sovereignty being violated by imperialism. So we've got this kind of turnaround by the 1940s.